In this video, the captain gives me a lesson on the basics of tide and currents and explains how we use tide and current predictions to make the best time on a recent trip we made from Charleston, South Carolina to Edisto Beach and back. He discusses paper charts, GPS chart plotters, and the benefits of the Active Captain app. Before every sail, we check weather conditions, wind direction, and speed, but the predicted tides provide some key planning information.
The clue about that is that if you're going from a low tide to a high tide, the current is probably going to be flooding. So there's a horizontal component to the way the water moves. The tides are a vertical rise and fall, but as that happens, it affects the horizontal movement of the water coming in on what they call a flood, or going out on what they call an ebb. And when the water's going from low tide to high tide, that's the flood. When the tide's high and the current changes, because the tide starts to drop, the current changes and it starts to ebb out until you reach the point of low tide. And it's called, in our area, semi-diurnal tide. Down in the Gulf Coast, it's called a diurnal tide, and the difference is a diurnal tide is one high and one low per 24-hour period, and a semi-diurnal, which we have up here in Charleston and most of the East Coast, is a two high tides and two low tides a day.
What is the difference in the height of the water between a low tide and a high tide here?
All right, it's called the range of the tide. The range of the tide is the height or the vertical distance between low tide and high tide. Right here in Charleston, it's around 5 feet, give or take. So it just depends on where you're at, how the moon affects the tides, and just what your predictions are. You have to pay attention to predictions.
So when we're looking at a chart, this is the South Edisto River, and I'm looking at these numbers here.
Okay, those are the predicted minimum depths of the water, and that's based also on the addition of this particular chart that changes over time. But what you're seeing when you look at these numbers of the depth of the water is what they call the mean lower low water. You take the average of all those over a period of time, and those become the depths that are printed on the charts.
So this chart shows some kind of shoaling.
Somebody reported that shoaling, and a lot of the information that the chart people at NOAA get for presenting their charts out there has to do with information that's provided by mariners.
So now that we have electronic navigational aids, like what is the one that we use?
We use Navionics and a Garmin. These depths of water that show up on these charts are definitely affected by the flow of the current, flood and ebb. And sometimes areas that seem to be deep by the depth indicated on the chart are actually shallower because sand's been pushed up there by some kind of current event. It might have just been wind driven, it might have been just a regular current over time,
or a bad storm.
It might have been a bad storm, could have been anything like that. So you have to take all the depths that you see on these charts with a grain of salt and use everything you have within your power to verify that they're either correct or have changed. And I can't stress enough how much Active Captain makes a difference in doing all that. And they'll update what they've experienced. And so if there's a place that says there's 10 feet of water, but a mariner experienced that there's only 6 feet of water and not much almost not enough for them to anchor, they may publish that on the Active Captain. So there's a good reference to have.
And having your own depth sounder,
fathometer, depth sounder, part of your navigation system, makes a difference too, because you can verify in real time what's going on, and if you see that it does look like it's the same as the charted depth, you can have a little more confidence and relax. But if it doesn't look anything like what it says the charted depths are, you have to use a little more caution and proceed accordingly. A lot of navigation apps have Active Captain, and then you'll see symbols like this that show an area that has information, the T or the sailboat symbol here. Then you tap on that, or that symbol, and it tells you what it is. It gives you the name, gives you the area code and telephone number, and notes. It gives you what channel that they answer on, if they have transient berthing, this and that and the other thing interested in. That's for a docking place. That's for something like that. But you also have areas where there are anchorages. There's Fishing Creek right here, and it shows a little anchor symbol right there. You tap on that, and you tap on the same symbol over here on the left hand side to get information on it, and it tells you the summary of the information that's been input about that particular feature. Navigation tells you there's 7 feet of tide.
And that's kind of important when you think about the anchoring. Makes a difference about how much rode you put out.
Yeah, that's right. You have to take the height of the tide, and then the depth of the water between the water level and the height of your freeboard till you get to where your anchor comes across the deck. And you take all that into consideration, and then you have to decide how much chain you're going to put out based on that length, that depth.
Prepare the anchor for the high tide, even if you come in at low tide, is that?
That's right, because you don't want to prepare the anchor for low tide and have the tide come up, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough scope out. You know, for people like us that deal with the intercoastal waterway all the time and very limited offshore, but you know, we like to do the offshore when we can. You have more options, but you have also more considerations to deal with. I think so, anyway.
Can you show me a little bit about how you setting waypoints and that kind of thing?
But you expand a chart as much as you can to see where the safe water is, and then you put your waypoints in. And sometimes it's just a matter of touching the chart screen and then saying add a waypoint, and then you just go and you add as many waypoints as you need to stay in safe water and to keep you. And this is important too, because if all of a sudden you're trying to enter or leave an area and you have waypoints for it, but the weather turns bad and a big thunderstorm comes along and the visibility goes down to 0, if you've got nothing else, you've got those waypoints in your GPS on your nav plotter. I would still be able to do navigation the old-fashioned way with parallel rulers or triangles and plotting and all that stuff, just to know how to do it. But there's nothing that beats the immediacy of having GPS and chart plotter information at your fingertips. It makes it easier to steer and stay safe.
Talk about this trip that we made to Edisto, why all of this understanding about current and tide was important. You can see that we have a lot of different waterways that are involved. So we start out from the Cooper River Marina, and we have to come through the Charleston Harbor around the peninsula, and then entering through
Wapoo Creek.
Little section right here is notorious for having some really fast currents.
That's
a lot
right.
of people have issues with that. Can you explain how it is that happens?
Well, you're right. These parts over here are just affected by the normal tides and tidal currents. The heights of the tides and the velocities are as predicted in the tide tables and current tables. Here at Wapoo Creek, and specifically at Elliott's Cut, which is right down here at the end of Wapoo Creek where it goes into the Stono River, is it's like a kind of a squeeze point. And the reason is because, let's just say on a flood current, you've got the incoming current from Charleston Harbor that goes both up the Cooper River and up the Ashley River. So when it gets to the point where it reaches the Wapoo Creek, it's also trying to push through the Wapoo Creek. The current from the Stono River, where it comes in the Atlantic Ocean and comes up the river, meets the current at Elliott's Cut and pushes through to the ICW. So you have two currents meeting to pull the water from Wapoo Creek through Elliott's Cut into the Stono River and this portion of the ICW. So at the maximum current, the max flood, the current velocities are much higher than they would be out here in the Cooper River entrance or in the Cooper River proper, anywhere you want to talk about, or even the Ashley River for that matter. intercoastal waterway, which is this part right here, and it gets skinnier and skinnier, and you go down, and then it opens back up into the area around Church Flats and Young's Island, and goes on down into what is the North Edisto River. Now if you see, this waterway is connected to this waterway. So the problem is, when you try to ride the current and you have a flood here and the water's coming in the Stono River, you've also got a flood happening down here at the North Edisto River. It's coming in and it's pushing through and it's trying to get up the intercoastal waterway. So there has to be a place where these two currents meet. And instead of riding the current and having the current push you along, you find a place along the way where you're actually going against the current that's coming from the other body of water. And when that happens, you slow down.
All of this came into play, especially for us on this trip when we were on our last leg of the trip.
What we were doing was predicting the time that we would leave to travel this area based on the current predictions, so that we could have the current push us for the maximum amount of time.
So we were working on trying to use the current to increase our speed as much as possible.
Oh yeah, increase our speed, or at least to not thwart our speed.
We had made our way up from the Edisto Beach Marina, right, coming up the South Edisto River, made anchor at Fishing Creek. So the next morning, even though we were up at sunrise, we took a look at the situation, and we were the current in the North Edisto River was slack before the flood at 11:55. So we planned to get underway about 10, because slack water at Elliott's Cut before the ebb was at 16:22.
And we wanted to ride the current as far as we could. Also, because the flood hadn't started yet at North Edisto River, it meant that there was still an ebb going on. It looked like the current for Fishing Creek was actually in concert with the current for the North Edisto River. So when we left at that time, and we were able to take advantage of that ebb current going down until the current changed at the North Edisto River, and we were able to ride the current up through the intercoastal waterway again until we got to
Limehouse Bridge. The goal of that was to be able to be in Elliott's Cut.
Yeah, prior to any kind of maximum current, because it really does run so hard through Elliott's Cut that if you're bucking it, you may only make, with a little engine like we got, 6 horsepower engine, we should be able to make 4 to 6 knots in no current. But going against the current that can happen at Elliott's Cut when the flood is strong as it can be, we may be down to a half a knot or a knot. And so you want to get there.
That's very busy traffic in there too. You don't
it
want
can
to be
be,
around.
and not just pleasure craft. There are commercial interests going through there too, tugs and barges and whatnot. So you want to get through there. But once you're through Elliott's Cut, even though you're still bucking the current, it's not quite as bad, or strong I should say. So you have to be careful when you approach areas like this where currents being supported from 2 different areas, and make sure that you know what's going on, make sure you know what the capability of your boats are, and take into consideration any traffic that's around. Give a security call, see if there's any other commercial traffic out there coming your way, and if there is, you may want to hold up, or they may call you to pass through, but you just want to be, doing the proper thing, the prudent mariner thing. But you're getting this, aren't you?
Making sense.